Jennifer Ward from WRCOG staff is going to be giving a presentation on the sub-regional climate action plan that WRCOG has been working on probably for the last year or so, along with all of its member agencies, which we are one of them, and we have been intimately involved in the review of this climate action plan. And so with that, I'd like to go ahead and turn it over to Jennifer, and she'll walk you through everything.
Thank you. I think we're pulling up a PowerPoint, but as Mr. Bassey mentioned, my name is Jennifer Ward. I'm with the Western Riverside Council of Governments, and I'd like to thank you, Chairman Smith, members of the Commission, for having me out tonight. WRCOG is a sub-regional planning organization. We represent Wildomar along with 16 other cities, the county, 2 regional water districts, Eastern and Western, and then the Riverside County Superintendent of Schools and the Morongo Band of Mission Indians are also make up our members. And we run a number of different programs related to transportation, the Transportation Uniform Mitigation Fee Program, or TUMF, our HERO program, several other energy and water and waste programs, as well as sustainability programs, which is what I'm here to talk to you about tonight. So I'll just kind of go through an introduction if this doesn't get pulled up. I know you have a busy agenda tonight, so I'll keep it brief. Also feel free to stop me at any time if you have questions. About 3 years ago, we received $400,000 from the state's Strategic Growth Council, the State Department grant, to put together a climate action plan for Western Riverside County. And the main purpose of doing a climate action plan is to help jurisdictions such as Wildomar comply with some of these state mandates that are out there, like AB 32 and SB 375, that require the state as a whole to reduce your greenhouse gas emissions. But the climate action plan is a way for local jurisdictions to help align themselves with those goals. And so the, like I said, the primary goal is to help with compliance of greenhouse gas reductions, but there's a number of other reasons why you want to do a climate action plan. So there's a lot of great work that occurs in the city, WRCOG, and throughout Western Riverside County. And so this plan is a great way to put a framework around a lot of the land use planning, transportation planning that's already occurring. So our climate action plan, or CAP, takes into account everything that's going on in the region right now and kind of ties it all together in the context of sustainability. Another benefit is that while these state laws don't require you to do a climate action plan right now, they do incentivize it. And one of those incentives is a CEQA streamlining benefit. So if a city has a locally adopted climate action plan, any future development that occurs in the city simply has to prove that they're consistent with our climate action plan. And we'll actually develop a checklist. And so that project or developers just has to check all the boxes to prove that they're consistent with this plan, and then they can bypass the GHG analysis that's required as part of CEQA for all other future projects that can prove that consistency. So there's a pretty big time and cost savings benefit there. Also a nice incentive to provide to developers that are looking into this area. There's a number of different other cities in the region that have already done climate action plans, and so this is a nice way to bring the sub-region as a whole to a level playing field. The WRCOG's preparing this plan for 12 of our cities that haven't already done a climate action plan, Wildomar being one of those cities, and so this kind of fills in the gap, brings everyone into the same climate action field. Yep.
What cities have adopted the plan?
The cities that have currently adopted or are in the process of adopting one right now are the county. The county of Riverside's in the process. Corona.
Turn one of those back on.
Yeah, this is only one off. Thank you.
Thank you. Corona. The city of Lake Elsinore, Murrieta, and Temecula have also already prepared one, and Menifee is considering it as part of their general plan. So this plan fills in that gap. These are the 4 kind of main steps of a climate action plan. The first is to do an inventory. That's basically a snapshot of what the city is emitting through its municipal operations, and also what your community members are generating when they drive their vehicles, use energy and water in their homes and businesses. And then taking a look at what growth is expected in Wildomar and the subregion, we forecast those base year emissions, and we used 2010 as our starting year. So taking a look strictly at population, housing, and employment growth, if we were to do nothing and not implement any climate change greenhouse gas reduction strategies, what your emissions would look like in 2020. But rather than not doing anything, we're going to do something through this plan, and so we've established a reduction target, and that helps you align with those state goals that I mentioned and has the other streamlining and co-benefits. And then the way to achieve that reduction target is through a range of different strategies, whether it's energy efficiency, providing more transportation options. All of those strategies are housed in the Climate Action Plan. As I mentioned, we're completing this plan for 12 cities, and that business as usual scenario, if you were to do nothing just based on growth, those sub-regional jurisdictions are expected to see an increase of about 25% in your emissions. Wildomar is slightly above the average and is expected to see growth in 30% total emissions in a business as usual scenario. So this just shows how you compare to the other jurisdictions. Obviously, the cities with higher populations will have a larger amount of emissions, and those that are expected to grow at a faster rate will see a bigger spike in their emissions. Because of these state goals that are in place, we set our target of 15% below our baseline emissions by 2020. So as I mentioned, the business as usual scenario is to grow from your baseline by 25%, but we're actually looking to cut our emissions by 15% from your baseline. So that's a pretty big swing there, but this plan focuses on 2020 because that's a more realistic target. We have a goal set for 2035, realizing that in the next couple years we'll have to reevaluate, reassess growth. So I mentioned that's a pretty big swing. However, the state is already doing a lot to address greenhouse gas reductions through things like low carbon fuel standards. So those programs don't require the city to do anything. Low carbon fuel standards will cause people and require people to have cleaner fuels, drive cleaner cars in the future, but the city itself doesn't have to do anything. But you get to take credit for the benefit that your community sees because of that standard. Similar to regional programs, WRCOG's HERO program has been able to see a lot of energy efficiency and water savings in the region, and a number of your residents participate in that program. The city doesn't have to implement it, but you still get to take credit for those GHG reductions. So what's left is actually a very small portion of that chunk of emissions we're trying to reduce that's left to the local jurisdiction to address. And so we worked with city staff, primarily through our planning directors committee as an advisory group, to develop a list of measures that really it's a bottoms-up process, and it's reduction strategies in the energy, transportation, water, and waste sectors that are realistic, that the cities could plausibly implement by 2020. And so based on the input that we received from all of our jurisdictions, we actually were able to prove through these different strategies that the subregion as a whole could achieve a 17% reduction below its baseline levels by 2020, and that Wildomar can actually see a 19% reduction. So you're exceeding our target, which is nice because it provides us for some wiggle room if funding falls away for some strategies or some of our estimations don't play out how we planned. You're still very likely to achieve that target. This just breaks it down by sector. Transportation and energy were the greatest causes of emissions, and so those are the sectors where we see the most opportunity to realize greenhouse gas reductions. And again, the spread here of the jurisdictions is largely correlated to population size and growth that you're expected to see. So these are some of the top measures that are included in the Climate Action Plan. Those listed 1, 2, and 3 were the most successful measures for Wildomar. So by increasing bike infrastructure, the amount of bike lanes and provision of bike parking in the city, it actually shows that you can significantly reduce your vehicle miles traveled just by providing those options for people. And that helps achieve a pretty big chunk of your local reductions. Same with implementing traffic signal coordination on your main arterials.
Excuse me, what is C&D?
That C&D is construction and demolition. So that's an example of a state law. There's a state requirement to reduce, divert 50% of your construction and demolition waste. And so simply by complying with that state mandate that already exists, you're able to achieve a lot of reductions. This is just an example. It's hard to read the text, but just shows you how the plan is laid out. It describes each measure. There's different levels, silver, gold, and platinum, which is another nice feature of the sub-regional plan. It allows for flexibility. If one city wants to pursue bike infrastructure at a more aggressive level than another city, the plan allows for that. So since we did it for 12 different cities that all have different characteristics, those different participation levels allow you to tailor it to your city or not participate in some of the measures at all. And then something that we did was highlight the community benefits or the co-benefits, because greenhouse gas reductions and emissions is kind of an arbitrary topic, and so it's hard, it doesn't really resonate with the public, with elected officials, and so while the goal of the plan is to establish these targets that the state has set in place, we really wanted to highlight how it's an overall quality of life plan. We focus on the economic benefits, such as the CEQA streamlining, as well as a lot of these other public health, transportation, and mobility benefits that are associated with each of the measures. As I mentioned, we've sought input from both our technical staff at the planning director's level. Our city managers committee has also weighed in on the plan, and we have already presented it in draft form to our executive committee, and what this meeting is kind of springboarding is our public review portion of the climate action plan. For the next few months, we're soliciting input from city staff, from our key stakeholders such as the gas company, Edison, the building industry, a lot of these other external agencies that want to weigh in on a plan like this, and also members of the public who want to provide input on these different reduction strategies. So for the next couple of months, we'll be refining the draft, and WRCOG is scheduled to approve it in June of this year. So that is the information and kind of where we are in the plan right now. I will mention, I say WRCOG will approve the climate action plan because it's a sub-regional document. WRCOG approves it as a whole, but it's up to each city to take it and adopt it at the local level. And in order to have a locally adopted certified climate action plan, you do have to address CEQA for the climate action plan. And so our grant doesn't cover that step of the process. We will provide the city with a suggestion of what steps you would have to take in order to comply with CEQA, and some of the options that we've talked about are having it be included with the general plan update and housing element EIR that you're currently doing right now. And so that's one option. WRCOG is also looking for funding to do a program environmental impact report. And so if we find out about that funding in a few months, so if we're able to do that, then each jurisdiction can, be included in that program EIR. So those are our next steps. Just wanted to provide you with this information tonight. Happy to answer any questions that the commission may have.
I've got one. We have a community that likes to pride itself on its horses, but there's nothing in that plan that gives credit for riding a horse versus riding a bicycle.
You're actually not the only people to mention that. Norco is also one of our climate action plan members, and so we did look at because the bike infrastructure is not just bike lanes. We actually took a look at how you could expand that kind of alternative transportation infrastructure to trails that allow for both bike and horse usage, and so that's definitely something we took into consideration. While it might not be a large enough amount that you can actually quantify how many GHG reductions you can achieve from that, it's mentioned in the existing programs that the city has or the existing characteristics of the city. And so it's you will see those benefits, I think, with the provision of the trails.
In other words, we get credit
Yeah.
by incorporating it as part of the trails program.
Yeah.
Okay.
I have just a general question, because this is about implementing strategies that successfully address state legislation AB 32 and SB 375. My question is there an evidence-based, research-proven correlation between greenhouse gases and climate change? Or is this just a political?
No, I think, the plan itself and those laws itself were based on a number of different scientific research initiatives. We've corresponded, we didn't just develop this in-house. We've sought information from a lot of different consultants. The Governor's Office of Planning and Research, which is one of the, they kind of serve as the State Department that provides local guidance to jurisdictions on addressing climate change and how it relates to greenhouse gas reductions. They've been kind of an advisor to this plan throughout the process. So, and the introduction of the Climate Action Plan goes through that, but it's definitely based in research.
You mentioned in your report state legislation of AB 32 and SB 375. Could you elaborate a little bit on that?
Yeah, so AB 32 is the law that requires the state of California as a whole to reduce its overall emissions to 1990 levels by 2020. So to get back to the levels we had in 1990, sometime in the next 6 years. And after doing a lot of analysis by the Office of Planning and Research and the California Air Resources Board, they kind of equated that level to about a 15% reduction from the 2010 timeframe, which is why we chose that 15% target. SB 375 is a law that AB 32 was passed in 2006. SB 375 passed 2 years later in 2008. That was a focus on the transportation and land use sector. So SB 375 requires the state as a whole, and it zeroes in on our different metropolitan planning regions. So WRCOG and the city is under the Southern California Association of Governments jurisdiction territory. That's the big Southern California region. It sets a target for each of those regions to reduce strictly their single passenger vehicle emissions by a certain level by 2035. And so that's where that 2035 goal comes into play in our plan. So those are just two different state guidance.
So it just addresses single passenger vehicle emissions, not multi-passenger vehicle emissions?
It addresses by that I mean not like trains and
trains and buses.
Yeah.
Public transport doesn't have a limitation on it, but single passenger private transportation.
Under SB 375, it just focuses on the private transportation, cars, small trucks. But AB 32 as a whole, like I said, it's overall emissions. They have a whole different host of strategies. That's a law that the Air Resources Board and the Air Quality Management District is kind of charged with achieving.
How did you determine the percentage of reduction required for Wildomar?
It's a lot of math and calculations that go into it, but Climate Action planning is a relatively new field since these laws that I mentioned are relatively new, but based on a lot of different plans that have been achieved at the city and county level throughout the state, there's an established formula for all these different types of strategies. So if you implement a certain amount of new bike lanes in your city from now until 2020, just that kind of increase in bike lane miles is correlated through a formula that's been demonstrated through other plans, other scientific research to reduce emissions. It's just based on the amount of cars you're likely going to take off the road by providing more bike options.
Does your plan take into account the type of fuel used by the multi-use vehicles such as buses? Does that give credit for?
Yeah, and so that's kind of falls into the regional programs. We worked also with the Riverside Transit Agency that provides most of the transit options here, and they have a great plan to convert a lot of their buses and vehicles to natural gas. And so we took that into account in our projections of transit emissions that are being reduced. And again, that's something that a regional agency is really taking responsibility for, and doesn't require the city to do something.
Commissioners? Commissioner Swan, any comment? Commissioner Brown?
I'm good, thank you.
Okay. Commissioner Langworthy, any more questions?
No, I'm just thinking there needs to be additional legislation to ensure private transportation, whether it is that there's a offset credit for having a horse in your yard versus another car, so that Wildomar has some kind of advantage in this numbers game.
Yeah, and sorry.
No, I'm just thinking about the horse emitting emissions. So.
Hey, how do we determine that?
That's natural.
We're not even going into the
We're not
dairy.
going there. I know, we won't go there.
Well, and I also mentioned that the prior to even doing the emissions inventory was to take a look at the existing conditions. And so, we're not assuming that every single person in the city of Wildomar uses a car for their transportation. We took 2010 was that place that we started. So all of the the existing other options that people use for transportation were taken into account at your starting point at 2010. So you're not kind of starting at a disadvantage. You're starting from what the community looks like right now.
I've got one question, and it's with the Senate bill. I mean, being so, whoops, get used to this. I'm sorry, I'm the new guy on the block. I'm not
Me
used
too.
to this. Is there anything in the works with these measures that would give credit to developers for themselves for creating more trails?
That's a great question. I think that I'm not sure that there's that type of incentive under the existing laws through different kinds of incentive programs. I don't know, Matt, if you want to elaborate, but
Yeah, indirectly,
Yeah.
there is, because we have adopted the Cal Green Building Code, which
Yeah.
has all of these different measures for EV hookups, bike racks, I can't think of the other items, that kind of indirectly will reduce greenhouse gases directly. So there's not an incentive where you may get more density if you provide this at this point. But because of some of the state mandates in the building code and through this program, they'll kind of help in meeting those guidelines, because we may require trails. And let's say we have a large development, we put an internal trail system in, that helps. But there's no incentives where they might get additional density or fast tracking, other than what Jennifer said about the CEQA thing. Once this climate action plan is done, there are provisions that will be in CEQA that will help streamline the greenhouse gas analysis that's done. Mark will be talking about that when we go through the general plan update PowerPoint as well.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
thank you for
Thank you
your
very
time.
Thank you for your time.